Hello and welcome to Group 24's presentation on the topic of a living minimum wage. The research and presentation of this work has been completed by Yutong Han, Tommy Liu, Tamara Kovacevic, Kevin Gaddery, and Thane Fitzgerald. Our position is that, given the continuing rise of income inequality and that social justice is a core Canadian value, be it resolved that the minimum wage in Canada should be a living wage. In the following slides, we will introduce you to the topic that we are debating, provide a background on the issue, we will delve deeper into explaining our position on the issue, we will present some alternative or opposing claims and provide reasoning as to why they are incorrect, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with a conclusion of the facts presented. Please sit back and enjoy as we take you through our research and work to convince you that in Canada, the minimum wage should most certainly be a living wage. At this time, we'd like to provide a background or an introduction to the issue. Before we begin discussing our position on the issue of minimum wage as a living wage in Canada, we think it's important that we provide some background on the issue and define some of the concepts that we feel are pillars of this issue. First, let's look at the concept of minimum wage. The Government of Canada defines minimum wage as a basic standard that sets the lowest wage rate that an employer can pay to employees. In their article, The Minimum Wage in Canada, Kathleen Derry and Paul Douglas identify Alberta as the first province to introduce what has become known today as minimum wage. In 1917, Alberta introduced and passed legislation called the Factories Act, which provided that no person shall be employed by an employer in any factory, shop, office, or office building at a wage less than $1.50 per shift. It is therefore evident that this notion of a minimum wage is deeply ingrained in Canadian society with a strong historical basis. With that being said, let's look at a living wage. A living wage can be understood as a wage that enables the worker to live their life to the fullest potential. What this means can be subjective. However, Hugh Mackenzie and Jim Stanford shed some light on this concept. They argue that a living wage is characterized by a wage that allows employees not to just survive in minimal physiological terms, but to have a decent quality of life, to raise children to be healthy and successful citizens, to enjoy recreation, culture, entertainment, and to participate fully in society. These basic principles should be guaranteed to all human beings at a very minimum, and this is why we are arguing in favor of ensuring that the minimum wage reflects the basic principles of a living wage. Let us now take a look at the current situation. Minimum wage is a poverty wage. A CBC News article published in September of 2017 highlights the current situation in Manitoba, which is anything but having a minimum wage that can be considered anywhere near a living wage. Rather, the Manitoba Federation of Labour presents the current minimum wage as being a poverty wage. Having a minimum wage that is considered a poverty wage means that individuals working full-time and earning this minimum wage are unable to fully participate in society, something that we identified earlier as a basic need for human beings. In Ontario, the situation is changing. In 2017, the minimum wage was $11.60. An employee working full-time would have earned just $24,128 before taxes and deductions. The Government of Canada's 2016 low-income cutoff for high-populated metropolitan areas was $24,949. This means that a full-time employee earning minimum wage would have been below the poverty line. With the 2018 increase to $14 per hour, employees are now above the poverty line. However, the extent to which this improves the employee's quality of living is yet to be determined. Now we ask, what are the effects of living below the poverty line? Well, living in poverty has profound negative effects. Josh Brandon and Molly McCracken write that researchers have become increasingly aware of the damaging effects that both poverty and low income can have on the mental and physical health of individuals and families. The compounding stress and anxiety that individuals experience because of the income inequality that they are suffering from is beginning to be recognized by research teams. Ensuring that the minimum wage is a living wage is the first step toward ensuring that our working population maintain their mental and physical health and that they and their families are able to become and continue to be successful and productive members of society. Now I'll turn to Kevin and Tamara to provide a more in-depth discussion about our position on the issue.
So why should minimum wage be a living wage? No working individual should be paid a poverty wage and as a result be forced to face impossible choices, like whether or not to put food on the table or pay their heating bill. These kinds of decisions can lead to serious mental health issues, which also caused increased expenses for our healthcare system. It is estimated that in 2017, the healthcare system could have realized a cost savings of $3.9 billion if the health inequalities from wages were eliminated in British Columbia alone. Furthermore, ensuring that everyone was paid a living wage for their work would relieve the government of having to subsidize many of the programs they have for low-income workers, which could then be spent in other areas. Paying a living wage for all jobs in Canada will allow Canadian citizens to cover their basic needs regardless of what their job is. Basic needs are things like food, clothing, shelter, transportation, childcare, and a modest savings. When we're talking about a modest savings, we're talking about 2 weeks' pay for each adult in a family of 4. A living wage is not meant to cover expenses like the repayment of debts from credit cards, loans, or car payments, nor cover things like long-term savings for a house, retirement, or putting your child through university. It's also not meant to cover expenses related to serious illness, disabled or elderly family members, or anything beyond the basic entertainment, recreational, or holiday expenses. It has also been shown that when low-income earners receive a permanent increase to their income, they spend almost all of it, whether it be on food, recreation, or even rent for moving into a new home in a better neighborhood. All of this puts money right back into the economy, which in most cases is their local economy. This in turn leads to more profit for their local businesses. Another way that the minimum wage, being a living wage, is beneficial to society is it allows for adults to continue their education. This in turn enables them to pursue more gainful forms of employment and a greater income. This income, again, will in most cases be put directly back into the Canadian economy. Lastly, allowing people to earn at minimum a living wage at any job they take in Canada will help all employers overall. This will occur through savings in retraining and lower employee turnover, as well as greater profits through increased spending in the economy, high employee morale, lower absenteeism, and a greater loyalty to the employer. An example of this was shown at Walmart when they beat their profit expectations even though they raised their operating costs by more than 8%, which was mainly in part to wage increases. Walmart executives told CNN that the benefits outweighed the costs of these higher expenses.
Hello, my name is Tamar Kovacevic. I will be presenting the top 4 reasons for the living wage. Firstly, the living wage contributes to Canada's economy in the long term. If the minimum living wage would be implemented throughout Canada, the socio-economic benefits to the Canadian population and economy would strengthen the purchasing power of the Canadian dollar and discretionary income of Canadians, whereby Canada will have multi-independence of funding our own economy by reinvesting surplus money into communities will contribute to Canada's national economy. Secondly, eradicating Canadians' dependence on government social assistance programs. Poverty poses the biggest threat to Canadians and to our GDP. The top 3 factors are housing, food, and electricity. As a result, the low-income earners are accumulating debt due to the government supplement is insufficient. People are using the Canada Child Tax benefit as a supplemental form of income as opposed to using that money towards the child's education. If Canadians are not working and are just relying on government assistance, Canada will become a welfare state again like we once were after World War II. The reality is that the Canadian government cannot afford to support all Canadians in a welfare system because Canada has too much deficit. Thirdly, reducing personal debts of Canadians to have an increased disposable income will in turn have a greater economic participation. The growth of the Canadian economy will increase if Canadians repay their personal debts, since it is their responsibility and not the government's. When the aggregate income of Canadian households exceeds the amount of income they earn, the economy suffers greatly, and Canada then relies on foreign aid to alleviate the pressure off of our economy. Giving the opportunity for an increased living wage, low-income earners will reduce their debts, thus having more disposable income to participate in the economy in the long term. Lastly, the living wage increases population growth. Geographically, Canada is a large country that has a lower population than other smaller countries. Increasing the living wage will directly cause population growth to increase. Studies have proven that people want to migrate to an economically successful country, as money is the greatest incentive that motivates population growth. Therefore, Canadians will be encouraged to join the workforce, and the poverty-stricken will have an opportunity to be a contributor to Canada's economy. Let's make the Canadian dollar true, north, and free. As Canadians, we all must be accountable in order for us to become a stronger nation.
Hello there, my name is Tommy Liu, and I will be going over some of the potential rebuttals some may have against the idea of the minimum wage becoming a living wage. The first of which will be revolving around the potential for a large increase of inflation, thereby negating the positive effects that the living wage is supposed to have. A fair argument and assumption. However, there is much more evidence to show this to be untrue. In fact, according to an article from the Medium, there was often a decrease of inflation in the US after a wage increase. For example, when the minimum wage was raised by 20 cents in 1980, the inflation rate dropped from 13% to 10%. Yes, there were also periods where inflation rose in the US as a result of a minimum wage increase, but there are many more examples to the contrary. Some may argue that this is an old example that isn't relevant to this period. However, there is a recent report from researchers at the University of Washington on the effects of the wage increase in Seattle, Washington, that furthers this argument. After an increase from $12.50 to $15 an hour, they reported that there was little or no evidence to show any inflation or price increases. More often than not, there is no evidence to show that inflation rose as a result of a wage increase, and there are even times when inflation decreased after a wage increase. This ultimately goes to show that it is beneficial to workers regardless of those who think it will result in higher inflation, because as history has shown, it often has not. Another potential rebuttal might be that it will cause job loss or unemployment. This is another rebuttal that isn't very well proven. Many studies looking at unemployment after a wage increase have found no evidence of an increase in unemployment. One study, which will be discussed later, has even found that there was often an increase in employment after a wage increase. The first example will come from a study done on New Jersey's minimum wage increase in 1992 by David Card and Alan Kruger, which found no indication of an increase in unemployment. Another analysis from Christos Dukouliagos and T.D. Stanley, which studied 64 studies, one of which was the one done on New Jersey, found that there was little to no evidence to show a negative association between a wage increase and employment. One study by the National Employment Law Project even showed that a wage increase also resulted in an employment increase 68.2% of the time. So not only is there evidence to show no link between a wage increase and unemployment, there's also evidence to show that employment has even risen. This negates the idea that it would hurt workers and the economy. A wage increase to the living wage would ultimately benefit those who need it, as it's been shown that it doesn't result in higher inflation or unemployment.
Hello everyone, I'm Yu Tonghan. I have two different potential rebuttals to share with you. The first one is the impact on efficiency. Some people may concern that the increasing minimum wage will influence the working efficiency negatively, since by this way, no matter employees hardworking or not, they will have a living wage for sure. However, according to the minimum wage channels of adjustment in 2015, the efficiency wage theory is mentioned, which was firstly claimed by Carl and Josephine in 1984. It indicated that as the wages is increasing, the employees would feel more attracted and committed to their companies, which means they will pay more effort to have a better working performance, to show their companies that they are worth to be paid this money, and to lower the risk of being fired. Moreover, an experiment is shown in this paper as well, which is about among 81 fast food restaurants, 90% of their managers respond that as the wages is increasing, the standard would be higher too, which means the better attendance and working performance are expected from employees. People who don't meet the standards would lose their jobs. Therefore, we can conclude that the increasing minimum wage will not influence the working efficiency negatively, but be a motivation to let employees work harder. The second point I want to discuss is the impact on education. According to the economic impact of minimum wages, the author believed that as the minimum wage become higher, more and more teenagers would choose to drop out of school to earn a living, which is clearly a negative evidence for our statement. However, according to Card and Kruger in 1995, some exact statistics are showed. They pointed out that 10% increase led to a 1% to 3% reduction in employment of teens. The reason of that is the higher wage lead to a serious competition, and teenagers would never be the first choices of these companies, which strongly prove that education could hardly be influenced by the increase in minimum wage. Basically, these are the two potential rebuttals I want to talk about, and we still firmly believe that in Canada, the minimum wage should be increased to the living wage.